What's up, everyone? Pastor Chad here. Welcome to another episode of the Inside Out podcast. This podcast is here to help you grow in your relationship with the Lord by helping you grow in your knowledge of His Word. And today we have a very special podcast in store for you. We're talking about a topic where I needed to bring in the big guns, basically. So, brought in the big guns. We're talking about parenting, okay? So not only did I bring in my lovely wife, Kate, who is joining us today, but then we also brought in the Richters, Pastor Adam and Emily Richter. Most of you know them from City Church Rockford. They have been longtime friends. It's been 20 years, I just realized. 20 years since we have
we're
known
so
you guys.
old.
I know, it does make me feel really old.
20-year friendship right here.
20 years. So
It's proof it can happen. It can happen.
Exactly. So yeah, spent lots of time with them, been on vacations together, Florida trips, road trips. So we've seen them in action as parents.
And that's why we're surprised you're having us on.
And that's why you're here, because we're here to counsel you. We're here to counsel you on how to be parents. So
This is actually an interview.
exactly. We didn't tell you that. But no, so we're excited to talk about parenting today. But before we get started, I wanted to kind of, if you guys fill everyone in just on like your role here at the church, what you guys do, and then talk about just your family dynamics, because your guys' lives have changed dramatically in the past couple years, where you basically doubled the size of your family. So if you just want to share a little bit about that as well before we get into it.
Yeah, so the worship pastor here, but I also oversee like all the creative arts, area, which kind of encompasses communications and tech. So there's a lot of things, but worship is my primary responsibility here. Emily and I are also on the leadership team, which is essentially kind of like our elder board here at City Church. So yeah, we love it here. We've been here for 20 years, and it's cool to see God kind of take us from where we started out and what we started out doing here in ministry to kind of what we're doing now. We absolutely love it. And then I'll kind of let Em share a little bit about our family situation currently.
Yeah, so we have 6 kids. And I'll start at the beginning. We have 3 biological kids. They are 12, 10, and almost 8. And in 2022, we adopted our son, Elijah. And he is a joy. He's a little 3-year-old now. And then a little over a year ago, we were called on to give a home to his biological baby brother, which we said yes to. It was a foster care situation. And then in July, 7 months ago now, we took in his newborn baby sister. So we have, 3 kids, 3 and under, and then our 3 older kids. The situation with the babies right now is we're technically still their foster parents, but we are moving toward adoption with them. So that's really exciting. That has
Whirlwind.
brought us to our knees in so many ways.
So what you're saying is you have a lot of free time.
Lots of free time.
Lots of free time to do
Yeah,
it.
going.
That 30 seconds, in the morning where you open up your eyes, they're right there.
That's about it.
That's it.
About it.
Yeah, going from 3 to 6 in like about a 2-year span has been pretty crazy. But you know what? It's fun. We do feel like this is what God's called us to do, and so we feel like we're being obedient. Mm-hmm. And when you step out in obedience, doesn't matter how crazy the call may be. If you're being obedient, God gives you the grace to kind of carry it out. So we've been just totally operating completely in God's grace, and also with the help of awesome friends and family. But it's been a very, very crazy but great experience. So that's where we're at right now.
Well, it's just kind of funny because you guys have talked about adopting for a long time. Like you guys have talked about, we might adopt one day, but I'm sure this is not the way you thought it was going to go.
No.
Isn't it just kind of funny how God can do things where maybe even in your mind, you're like, I can see this happening, but then it's like, but we didn't see it going.
Yeah, there was like a really neat, pristine direction that I thought, this is how it's going to look, and it doesn't look anything like that.
Yeah.
But we keep saying like, hey, when you hold your life out and you say, Lord, our life is yours, our marriage is yours, our family is yours, He's going to take you up on it, and He has certainly done that.
It's like I kind of often describe it as like, when you give God an inch, He takes a mile.
Yes,
in a good way. And
way,
that's literally what He's been doing with us. Yeah. So it's been good, and I know you have this and you're going to say this, but also as a disclaimer, just because we have 6 kids and we're in this and you know, kind of crazy situation, does not in any way, shape, or form make us experts when it comes to parenting. Like, we are still very much.
In fact, I feel like now feel like I know less about parenting. Like the more kids I get, I'm like, I never knew anything.
Exactly.
How did I? What? Yeah. It's just everything kind of goes out the window when you have these kind of situations.
Yeah.
And
well, and that's because I put on here, like, before we were gonna really dive deep into it, like, I wanted to give like the disclaimer of, because this, as pastors in general, it's hard because you do talk on different things like parenting, marriage. And it's easy for people to look at you and be like, oh, because you're the perfect parent, or you have the perfect marriage. Or it's like, well, no, we're all humans. We all, I think there's some basic principles that I think we can live by that'll help, but that doesn't mean we're perfect in that ourselves. And so we're not saying that we have all the answers either. We have 3 kids of our own of 13, 10, and 8. And so, but we're still learning and going through stuff. But these are just some things. I think it's good to get the conversation going. And there are some things that we see that I think are important for parents today, but that doesn't mean that we're perfect in it. But we are not here saying we're the perfect parent. And it's hard too, because as a kid, like our own kids, right? Kids, I was a pastor's kid growing up too, and sometimes they unfairly get looked at as like, well, you should be perfect, basically, because you're a pastor. Your parents just talked about parenting, and your kid was running around the church like a crazy person. Like, well, my kids aren't perfect, so don't hold them to that standard.
Yeah,
so.
My kids are literally doing that right now. As we speak,
exactly.
So.
You're not a pastor's kid unless you're running around the church being crazy. So, So we're not saying we have all the answers, but there are some things I think we want to talk about today that I think can help some people out there that are parents or new parents. So, so we kind of want to start by asking the first question, and we'll kind of refer to you guys first, and then we'll answer as well. What are
give the good answer?
Exactly. Yeah. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see in parenting today? Like in general, if you're like, hey, this is the challenge of a parent, maybe it's something that is a challenge today that wasn't 30 years ago, or just in general, when you think of the challenges of parenting.
I think there's a lot of things I could say, but I think one of the biggest things is just the technology, that whole aspect of parenting, because it's different. It's like our parents, which I was raised in a Christian home, to a wonderful, I had a wonderful family, had a wonderful upbringing. My parents are great. I love them. I feel like I was raised the right way, but, my parents didn't have the issues with technology where literally, like, we all have it, the technology, like, in our hands almost all the time and put in front of us all the time. Like, they didn't have that kind of hurdle. For our parents, it was like, the biggest thing they had to deal with as far as technology went is like, how much TV can our kids watch? And it's like, we now have this new thing for parenting that it's like, we have to figure out, like, how are we going to let our kids interact with technology? What does that mean? And what are the guardrails that need to be in place for that? And we're just kind of, I feel like the older our kids get, the more it becomes something where you're like, hey, we got to have this kind of figured out how we're going to approach that. So I would say that's one of the big things for us, I feel like, is just because it's new ground.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think of it, our kids are the first generation to literally be raised in the internet age. Yeah, for sure. Where when we were born,
dial-up.
I don't know if the internet had even been created yet. That's how old I feel like we are.
By the time middle school, high school was like, dial-up, AOL.
Yeah.
Like,
and you could instant message people, but it's like you couldn't surf the web the way that...
And have access to everything at your fingertips. Yeah. It's just like, that is kind of scary. So that's definitely one I would say. I don't know if there's one you're thinking of.
I think we've kind of learned too. Like, we bought our older boys little iPods a few years ago because they listen to Adventures in Odyssey at night. They love music, and we thought, oh, this will be a great, kind of way for them to be introduced to technology, but keep, a bunch of guardrails up. But we just saw so quickly how, like, drawn they were to that device, and how, like, even though we had these guardrails and these rules, they would find ways to go beyond that. And so we had to make a decision and go like, okay, these are getting literally put away up on a shelf, And we haven't pulled them back down again because I feel like the more information that keeps coming out about the way that devices affect kids, the more we're just like, we don't need that right now. Our kids don't need that right now. And it's not like us sticking our head in the sand so much as it's just like, as they need to start using devices more, we will, reintroduce it. But I think we kind of had to learn the hard way, like they weren't ready for that. And that was not the right timing to do that. So I think that's something is just being willing, if you're a parent and you do introduce technology and you see it's having a negative impact, just you're the parent. You can take it away just as easily as you could give it. And your kids are going to be bummed out for like 5 minutes and then they'll get over it and be fine. But yeah, I think technology is a big one. I think identity, if I had to like pinpoint something that parents are up against right now, is the world is trying to speak an identity over our kids. For sure. And I think as parents, we have a really special, unique place and anointing and authority to speak identity over them. But the world's also coming for them and for their identity, as, you name it, gender and spirituality and, just anything you can think of. I think that's something else we try to be intentional with, is just telling our kids who they are and what God says about them.
Well, I think it's important too to know what they're being told. Like if your kids go to a public school or even any school in general, like what are they teaching your kid? What are they saying to you? Like parents have to be so on guard and up to date on like what are you being fed, who's telling you what, and making sure
or the shows that they're watching.
What they're watching. Yeah, nowadays.
And shows.
Yeah, it's like even kids shows. It's not like this innocent.
No.
Oh, you can trust anything that's on TV because it's a cartoon or whatever. It's like you have to watch everything, and so that's huge.
Because I know like for Emily and I, like we're very, as most parents are, we're like very passionate about making sure like we are teaching and training and raising our kids and helping them develop their worldview, not some show or some movie or some thing on the internet or some other person that we don't know or trust. And so that it does get harder and harder because the voices in the world just seem to get louder and louder.
For sure. What about you? What challenges that
you already talked about technology, but we're just tiptoeing into that with a 13-year-old. So the phone thing, we don't let her have a phone, but I would say she's in a school and she's definitely the minority. Like everyone in middle school has a phone. That conversation has come up quite a few times. She's probably one of 5, I guess, in her grade, and we're like, oh, too bad for you. Like, we love you too much. We're not going to at this point. And it's not even about trusting her. It's just all the things that come along with it.
Open doors that she could choose to walk through.
But that's part of what I feel like is such a like a lot of parents have a hard time with, is like they want their kids to be comfortable and fit in and have all these things, which again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that.
Right.
But it's like, as a parent, I believe and hold the conviction that our number one job is to disciple our children.
Right.
And discipleship is different than making sure our kids, are in style and have all the things we think they need to be comfortable. It's like sometimes as a parent, if we're discipling our kids to, not only love God, but to love the Word of God, then that means we're going to have to sometimes put them in uncomfortable situations where you're like, hey, you are going to kind of be the minority in this because, we feel like we there's a standard that we want you to live by.
Right.
And that's our job and our role as parents, is to disciple them, not just to, make their life easy.
Yeah. Right. I feel like she's going to be so grateful when she's a little bit older, as we all were, that you guys made that choice.
Well, and we've already seen, because like we gave her so when our kids turned 10, we let them have an iPad. And with that, we obviously had restrictions on it. But one rule that we had was like, you're not doing group message, like you're not texting, like you're not doing group messages.
Yeah, she can text us because she
can text us because like she's home alone or something. But you're not doing group text because we're not getting involved. And I think somehow somebody invited her to a group text.
Kept adding her,
and like within like the first day, there was already stuff on that text that was going on that like you don't want to be a part of that. And like this is
Yeah.
why
Yep.
you're not being a part of group
Yep.
text because
Yep.
you don't want to be involved with kids saying stuff that they shouldn't be saying, different things like that. So yeah, we've already seen that, but we told her at a young age, like, just so you know, you're not getting a phone.
Yeah.
Until we don't know exactly that time yet, but like you're not getting a phone anytime soon.
Yep.
Like you're not. And part of it is just being youth pastors and like we've studied the effects of this, so like we know. I think a lot of parents just don't know. They think it's just innocent. Give your kid a phone. Nothing's fine. Nothing's wrong with that. You know, nothing can come from that. And so where we've kind of studied it and we see the effects it has on kids, and so we're like, you're not going to do that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where we stood on that. But what else? You had something else that I thought outside.
Oh
of,
yeah, when we were talking about this earlier, I just said, I think for parents nowadays, it's really easy to compare what other people are doing and to see like, well, that's how they parent, or, you know, sports is a big one. We love sports. Our kids love sports, but to not get caught up in putting them in every little thing because, you know, Susie's in it and you don't want them to miss out, like the whole FOMO thing. Just we've had to kind of guard against that and make the best decision for our own kids, not worry about what anyone else is
Yeah.
doing.
Well, and you see that a lot in the sports world. Like obviously, I coach basketball. My kids all play sports, so we're around it all the time. And we see like I talk to parents like, yeah, well, my kids got to play AAU and we got to spend thousands of dollars playing all these travel things because if we don't, my kid's gonna fall behind or my kid's gonna. And so parents almost feel forced to put their kids in.
Which there's nothing wrong with those.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with those things. It's just that pressure that parents
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
I have to put my kid in this, and it's
Yeah.
like you really don't.
Yeah, and I think that
Really
comes
don't.
that comes from like sometimes I think parents get confused on like we think our job and our role is to like we're making some, you know, we're making an athlete or we're helping our kid grow up to be some world-renowned surgeon, and so they got to have all the, you know. And again, that there's nothing wrong with those things. There's nothing wrong with having goals for your kids and wanting them to achieve those goals. But it's like, man, as Christians, our number one objective is to disciple our children, to love the Lord and to love His Word. You know, and it's like that's our number one goal. And so that shouldn't take a back seat to some of these other things that are important and they're great.
Yeah.
But it's like, I've said multiple times, like, hey, I love all my kids. I want them to be smart and I want them to be intelligent and to have successful whatever someday. But more than that, like, I want them to have a good character and I want them to know the Word and I want them to live by it and to know the Lord. And like, that's more important to me. It's more important. And I think like we just, as parents, like we got to keep that as the number one thing,
Right.
you know, and not get distracted. So.
Right. Well, so obviously we talked about technology, which I think, yeah, we all agree. That's the first thing that came to my mind. When I think of challenges, that's like the top thing. So you mentioned like the iPod and stuff, but do you guys have set rules on like screen time, how much, whether it's TV, video games, if they have tablets of some sort, like do you guys have set rules for your kids of how much time they can spend on that?
Not really, because we just do like TV, and honestly, they don't really play. We bought them these little video games for Christmas. They're like the watch and play little handheld, you know, Mario and Zelda. So it's like they can do those, but we have kind of like our big list of things. Like this is what you have to do before you can even ask to watch a show or get on your video game, and it's schoolwork and chores and reading and you know all this stuff. And so obviously if, you know, I'm not going to let them sit down and watch 2 movies in a row. But we don't, it's sort of more like we try to fill the majority of our day with just other things.
Right.
And then there's just sort of this natural organic, like, well, here's a little space for some quiet time and a show. And let's just turn the TV on, or like at night, you know, we'll turn a show on as a family and do that. But I don't really feel like we have like really strict, like, you know, I'll tell them, like, you can go watch one show in the basement,
Right.
and then they'll watch their show, and then they try to sneak another one usually. But, you know, I'll yell down, hey, turn the TV off. So I don't know. I don't think we really are.
I mean, our parenting style is a little different. Like, we're not super, like, rigid and have all these, like, laid out, you know, rules and laws and whatever, you know. But we do ask a lot of our kids and expect, you know, them to, you know, be obedient and listen and, do chores and be responsible and all these things that we're teaching them. But, like, we're we're not like super regimented.
Right. And I think right now our home like is very different than it was 3 years ago. Like we don't really have downtime, right? We don't really have like a whole bunch of free time where they're looking for stuff to do. It's like we homeschool, so there's that, you know, our kids are insanely involved with the babies, and they help me with them, they play with them, they entertain them. And so I just think there's kind of this sort of natural flow that we've kind of gotten into where, it isn't really something that we have to closely monitor because none of us have the time for it, right? A bunch of TV right now.
For sure.
But we do let them play video games on their little handheld things. And because, like Adam said, for kids their age, we're asking a lot of them, and they are really stepping up to the plate. And so I also believe, like, encourage that, speak to that. That's something we do, and we call that out. But we also sort of give them privileges, beyond maybe what most kids would get.
Yeah, and that's kind of the tension is like, because when people talk about we'll talk about we limit screen times and stuff like that. It's like, oh, screens are the devil. It's like, screens aren't the devil.
Right.
iPads aren't. There's nothing wrong with them inherently.
Right.
It's just, but you do want to make sure it doesn't get out of control because it does affect that. And so, you guys are busy enough where it's like, it's not an issue because our kids don't even have time to really do that. Where, we're a little different in a way. I mean, I don't know, you can talk through kind of what we do with our kids, but.
Well, Chad grew up with video games, and I didn't.
I was a gamer.
Nintendo,
I really
man.
hate
I had
video
first
games,
Nintendo.
to be
honest.
I had the first Nintendo, man.
Real gamer over here.
But I got a gamer. So,
I'm a gamer.
One thing we have talked about in the last year was it kind of has created fun time for you to play with the kids, because that's what it kind of has become. Like if dad's playing with you, which is family time, you know. But I don't know if you've noticed this, because we have 2 girls and then our youngest is a boy. It's very different, like the addiction to video games. So Paxton's only 8, but it felt like whenever he played a game, he was asking every day. He could play forever if we let him, where the girls are kind of like, I'll play if you want me to play with you for a little bit, but they're never asking to go down and play. So we did have to limit it. So we decided that he could play on the weekends. And my rule was 30 minutes, which is not that much, but it kind of depends on.
Developed into like an hour.
Well, if we're doing it like as a family, it's a little bit different. But that was more for me, so that if he's asking me all the time, I had a clear answer of the weekend, because we've got homework, we've got different things we're doing at night. We want to make sure. So.
Because that was kind of what we noticed with our kids with video games is like, it's not like it's anything bad. They're at least doing something together. But there were times where it just kind of, created like this little addiction. Where then the more they played it, the more they wanted to play it. And then, especially Emily, because she's, home more with them all day.
Oh, I thought you meant especially Emily wanted to play.
Yeah. Emily really wanted to play.
She was like,
get enough of the Mario
just
Kart.
twitching, just like, I gotta play.
I do love a good Mario Kart. But.
She was noticing like it would change their attitude and their behavior.
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
where.
It literally would change their attitude.
Totally.
Where I would be like, you are acting this way, and you're acting like a crazy person, and you don't normally act like this, and I know what it is.
Yeah.
Like nothing
For sure.
else. It's just too much screen time or too much video games or whatever. And again,
and
it's like I feel like parenting is so much of that, of like you set a plan in place, you do your best to follow it, and then usually things go off the rails at some point because of life.
Like,
and then you just, okay, now we got to recalibrate, we got to come back to center, and we got to reestablish some things. And I think, I think the trick is coming back to center. And when you see those things, okay, now we have to address this, and we kind of got to maybe clamp down a little bit, and I don't know, it's never fun, but
well,
and there's always survival mode, because I remember like having newborns and being toddler, you can watch the TV all day because I'm just barely like surviving over here. It's like that's part of life.
Absolutely. There is definitely survival mode.
So what's interesting, because I just read a book called Anxious Generation, which I encourage all parents to read, because it deals a lot with technology, and it's by Dr. Michael Haidt, I think, and he's not even a Christian. Like, I think he's actually an atheist, but he's a psychiatrist that talks about the studies of basically screens, and from 2010 when iPhones became a big thing, and with screens in general, and the impacts it's had on girls and boys, and how depression and anxiety skyrocketed. But in the book, he talks about how things like social media impact girls more negatively and video games impact boys more, and it's more the negative side of it is the addiction side of it. And the hard thing with video games is there's actually a positive side to video games. Like I saw Joe Rogan, I think, had Elon Musk on, and they were talking about how surgeons that play video games perform like 60% better or 30% better than other surgeons because it helps like with their dexterity or something.
And their like reaction time to things. Yeah.
So and so I've seen other studies of that too. Of like actually there are benefits to video games. However, but it's that addiction side where if you just let a kid go play whenever they want, it's extremely unhealthy for them and their development and that and even like socialization wise.
Yeah, isolation.
They just say you're isolate and
teens.
Well, nowadays because you just go and you put on headphones, and even though you're talking to people online, maybe it's different than like face to face enjoying a game or enjoying fellowship with somebody. So it's still like in isolation, and so there's just a lot to that, and that's why me playing video games with my kids. Because I think we saw Protect Young Eyes came to our school a couple years ago. They even said that. They're like, hey, one of the best things to do with video games is do it as a family. Because then it is a family activity. You have that face-to-face contact with them, and you're still interacting with them.
You're all getting mad at each other.
Exactly.
So
You're all yelling at each
when
other.
You start playing
Conflict
Mario
resolution
Kart,
skills.
when you start playing Mario Kart and your kids start beating you, that's when I'm like,
That's when
this
Adam's
isn't
like,
fun
I'm
anymore.
out. That's right. This
I'm
is
out.
dumb. This game, I'm out. I get that. So, but screen time definitely, every parent has different rules. Yeah, we have video games on the weekend. Our kids have iPads, which we let them maybe 20 minutes. I mean, it's not even really every day, but if they ask, can I play my iPad? It's like, you got 20 minutes and that's it. But I think having some sort of restrictions on that is crucial because it does impact your kids. It does impact their behavior, and studies have shown that. And so, and a lot of parents don't understand that.
How do we teach our kid? Like, we also have to start teaching our kids, like, how to have, some self-control.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and we've talked a lot about this. It's like they're going to grow up with devices and TV and social media, and at some point, like it's going to come into their circle, and they need to know how to,
use it responsibly.
and have some self-discipline. Now, we have to really help them with that now. But hey, let's be honest. And I always look at it like this, like, as adults, we need help being self-controlled. I mean, sometimes it's like Em and I, we're like, oh man, we're on our phones too much.
Yeah.
We're and it's like, maybe it's, we're bored or we're nervous or we're whatever, I mean, and sometimes you just, I'm just going to go on my phone, and it's like, we have to sometimes check ours and be like, hey, we need to like, so it's like, even this isn't just for kids.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
It's like for us adults as well and us parents, like we need to be held accountable. So
well, I think even it says a lot of the effects of, iPads, iPhones, all that stuff. Where a few years ago, when I was kind of looking up this kind of stuff, I had read that said most of the developers of iPhones, like even people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, they didn't even allow their kids to have these devices. Like, these are the creators of these things, and they wouldn't even let their kids use it because they knew how addictive it was, and they knew how it could.
They're the ones who created it.
And they're the ones that
be
created
addicted.
it. Exactly.
Yeah,
That's like the crazy thing. It was, and I read that, I was like, there's no way that's true. But like, I'm like, no, it is legit. Like, many of these people don't even give their own kids the devices that they create because they know the addictive nature of it and how it can affect them. So that speaks volumes right there.
That's like, have you seen, the show on Netflix? It's like a mini documentary or whatever called Social Dilemma.
Yeah, we watched that a couple years ago.
That's one I would recommend for people to watch because, like, I watched that and it legitimately like scared me because these were like the developers of a lot of these social media companies that were like, they were like developers that were working for the Facebook and Instagrams and the Twitters and stuff. And they were just basically saying, like, these algorithms, this code, these things that they've developed was developed with the intent that they would be addictive and that people couldn't stop using them. Right. I mean, no different than like when they, first created the cigarette and were putting nicotine and tobacco in them. It's like they created those things with the desired outcome to be that it would create an addiction that would keep people coming back and using this thing. And social media is no different. But the negative effect, obviously, is that it creates, anxious, self-conscious, insecure, empty people. It creates that emptiness in us, and it's like almost like designed to do that, because then people start to think, I feel this emptiness or this anxiousness, and the only thing that can help me not feel like that is more of a dopamine hit that I get when I scroll my Instagram feed. Yeah. And it's like, oh man, it's so dangerous. And it's like these developers on this show were saying the exact same thing. They're like, I wouldn't let my kids use this.
Right.
I literally don't let my children use these things that I've created. It's like, whoa. Yeah. That's scary.
That tells you a lot right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we could talk technology stuff for hours. So, but the important thing is, as parents, do the research, I think, to see the effects of it. And I think it is important to have some sort of structure of not letting your kid just come home from school and, hey, my teenager's in his room for 5 hours a night, and all he is on his phone for, like, that's probably not the healthiest thing for them. So just having some sort of structure with technology is, I think, super important in today's world. But I guess the next question I'll ask you guys is, what are some essentials of parenting, right? A new mom comes up to you, new parents, and they're like, what are some things that you would say I need to focus on as a parent that is essential that I'm doing with my kids, whether it's how I treat them, just whatever it is. Like, what are some, I would call essentials of parenting today?
I mean, I believe, and of course this is maybe an expected answer coming from a pastor, but it's like, I believe having a strong church community, because I think families and kids, it's that age-old saying of like, it takes a village, right? And there's a lot of wisdom in that. Like, as we're raising our kids, especially believers that are trying to raise our kids, to follow Jesus in this crazy world, like, we need support, we need help, we need to come alongside other people who are on the same journey and can not only help us and encourage us, but be a sounding board. And I think having a strong church community is essential to that, because it's a place where you're not only then getting fed and getting, taught how to be a better parent and a better Christ follower, but, depending on what church you go to, most churches have great children's ministry programs, and it's like your kids and your teenagers are getting the same thing too.
Right.
So I just think that's like an easy one. Just be like, have a strong church community, and don't just have like a church where you're like, oh yeah, this is my home church, I go there once a month. Like, attend, commit,
consistent,
get involved. It's good for the whole family. So that's kind of an easy
put
one.
The effort in. It's definitely easy to kind of make excuses when you have little kids, but you will never regret that effort with building community.
I mean, we're very intentional, as I know you guys are, with teaching your kids and training them and, teaching them the Bible and all those things. But it's like, man, there's still so many times our kids come back from, whether it be church on Sunday morning or a Wednesday night program, and it's like they come back and they talk about stuff that they're learning, and I'm just like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
They're learning and growing beyond just what we're teaching them. So, I don't know. That, to me, just feels like a easy one.
Sure.
I don't know if you guys got any other.
I think for me, an essential for parenting, if I was talking to, like you said, Chad, like a new mom or someone who was maybe struggling, I think what has helped me the most in my hardest seasons of parenting is like reframing what I'm doing as worship unto God. I mean, it's like getting these babies was a total, like, just blew our world up. And literally there would be mornings where I would wake up and I knew there were 3 babies who all needed their poopy diapers changed. And that was just the beginning of my day.
That was this morning.
Like, exactly. one of them was going to need a bath because, their diaper went all over the place. Right. Another one is, going to be running around naked because I'm trying to, like, change this other one, give this one a bath. The other one's crying for a bottle. Like, and that sounds like insane chaos, made up fiction. It's just literally another morning at our house. Right. And so it got to a point where I would have to just, like, I would literally just open my eyes before I'd even open my eyes. I would just be like, oh, Lord, this is for you. Like, this is my worship to you. You've put these kids in our care. You've called me to be their mom and their foster mom. And this is really hard. And I mean, I don't know a single mom with a newborn who hasn't felt that way. It doesn't matter if you've got 1 baby or 3 babies. It's hard and it's a lot. And it does change. It changes everything about you in your life. But I think what changed me the most is when I just began offering those moments and those every day. I just would be like, God, this is for you. This is unto you. No one else is going to see this. No one else cares. Not in a bad way, but just, you know what I mean? It's, this is truly, I'm worshiping you as I mother these children. And I would pray, like, God, would you receive this as my worship? Like, I don't have time to sit down and read my Bible for an hour. And I don't have time to go in my living room and worship or in my kitchen and worship and just, be alone with you. But, like, would you receive this as worship? Would this be pleasing to you? And that, I feel like, really I didn't do that, like, with my older 3 kids. I don't feel like I had that moment where I was so desperate and spent that I was at that place. And so I think I would encourage parents, like, look at your role as a priestly role. You are discipling these kids. You're directing them and pointing them to Jesus. Like, that's our number one thing. But, like, your work is not unseen or wasted, right? Like, God is the God who sees. He sees those very small moments and those very, like, little gestures that parents do every single day. But we do have an opportunity to, like, treat that as a place of sacrifice and worship.
For sure.
Where I think I hadn't done that for the majority of my parenting career, if you want to call it that. But I do think God kind of worked on my heart in that area because that was all I had. That was all I had to give him. I'm not doing anything here at the church anymore. You know what I mean? Well, very little. I'm not, I don't have time to do the other things that I sort of always felt like was my service to God. And it was like, he's like, no, this is where I put you. This is what I called you to. This is all you need to do.
Well, and I think for parents too, it's like, I believe that for those who are parents, the single most important, or one of the single most important things that they can do is to raise their kids to know the Lord and to disciple them in that. And I think sometimes as parents, it can become easy or even attractive to just kind of abdicate that role to somebody else.
Right.
Well, they've got great teachers at school, and maybe they do, but nothing can replace a true parent.
Right.
Like our kids need fathers and they need mothers, and that's something that only we can give them that. And so I just think, to Emily's point, kind of as we've reframed that in our head of like, we all have callings in our life and we all have things we want to do and accomplish, and that's great. And some of them are even, things in the kingdom of God. That's great. But like, we've got to put our job and our role as a parent, that's a God-given calling. We've got to put that as a high priority. Right. And view it as like, again, as Emily's saying, as worship, because you can have a great ministry, and this is why I believe that in Scripture, when it goes through what are the qualifications of an elder or a teacher or a leader in the church, and it's like on all the qualifications, it basically says like you got to be a good parent. Right. You got to have your stuff together in your home. And there's a reason for that, because God's saying, hey, if you can't be faithful with that area, then why am I going to give you this big, large platform ministry or something if you're phoning it in as a parent? So it's like we have to make that a high priority and see it and view it as that, where it's like, hey, we are doing one of the highest callings that God can give anyone, a parent.
And that's what it drives me nuts, where I feel like our culture today is basically looking down on like, a stay-at-home mom or people are making decisions that I'm going to focus on my family first and maybe even put my career on the back burner because this is the most important thing to me. And their culture looks at it as like, oh, that's how dare you do that? Like that's selfish. That's
you
like,
really sold out.
Yeah, you really are you kidding me? Like that's if you were a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, like that is the most important job you can ever have. Like, that is incredible. Like, there's nothing to be ashamed of with that. Like, you are raising your kid, especially hopefully to be a follower of Christ, and no one should ever look down on you for that. And so that's really bothered me that our culture today has really spun that into like a negative thing. That's like, your kid should be your number one priority, right? It's like your marriage and your children. Those are the most important things in your life. So don't ever feel bad for making decisions based around that. So no, I think that's really good.
And that's not to say like, oh, people can't have a career or a job
absolutely.
or whatever, but it's just, it's all in how we frame it in our own mind and our own lifestyle and how we prioritize it. That's just, this needs to be prioritized.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So I guess for us, I mean, we kind of, we looked at essentials of parenting. I know we a couple years ago at Greenville did a message on parenting, and so we kind of pulled a couple of things that we talked about, I guess you could say like 3 like basics of parenting that we feel like are important, of love, discipline, and instruction, right? Kind of everything in parenting I feel like can be summed up in like these 3 things. So
kind of the pillars,
I guess you could say, of parenting. So I guess when I think of love, I think of, 1 John 3:18 says, "Dear children, let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions." So I guess, why don't you talk about like, what does that mean to love? Because every parent out there is like, well, I love my kids.
Right.
I love my kids, of course. Well, but what does that look like, I guess?
Well, I think one thing that we've kind of hit on is we read the 5 love languages, which can be a marriage book, but they have one for kids. And it dawned on us, because you look at your kids, I'm sure you guys would say the same thing. They're so different. Our 3 kids, how they, I think, feel loved from us is so different.
Yeah.
We started to kind of evaluate, like, our oldest is definitely like words of affirmation. You can see that like fills her love tank. That means a lot to her. Where, one of them is quality time. One of them is even different from that. So we kind of started to look at that and say, are we being intentional of how we're showing our love? Of course, you're going to do all the things, but there's certain ones I think that just kind of spark in them that make them feel a little bit more loved.
Well, and that's important, because obviously if you want your kid to, like, you love your kid, but you want your kid to know that. And so how you do that is important. So if your kid's love language is quality time, and you don't ever go do anything with them, but all you do is say, tell them encourage them all the time, which is great, and they probably like that, but they might be like, great, you told me good job, or you tell me you love me, but you don't ever do anything with me.
Right.
And like, they're going to receive that differently, right? If you give them gifts, like, I bought you all these new toys, but they're like, you don't ever tell me you love me. It's like, and I'm words of affirmation. That makes a big difference. So I think knowing what your kids' love language is, I think is actually really important, and making sure that we're feeding that is super important, because every parent will say they love their kid, like I said, but you want to make sure your kid knows that, and how you do that is crucial. And so that's one thing for us. Another thing, discipline. When I look at our culture today, if I would say what's the biggest struggle in parenting, I would probably say discipline. Like, I feel like there's a serious lack of discipline with kids. And I mean, if you look at scripture, Hebrews 12:11, no discipline is enjoyable while it is happening. It's painful, but afterward there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. Proverbs 29:17, discipline your children and they will give you a peace of mind and will make your heart glad. And so to me, like, discipline is so crucial as a parent, and yet it's one of the least fun things you do as a parent, but it's important. And ultimately, discipline, the reason why you do it is it's for correction, right? It's like, that's why I think how you discipline, even when you do, a lot of times as parents, we discipline out of anger. Like, in the moment they did something that ticks you off, and so we respond. And even that, we got to be careful, because we don't want discipline to be, oh, this is just mommy and daddy venting on us because they're mad. It's like, no, we want there to be correction in your behavior. So if I need to cool down for 5 or 10 minutes, then maybe I need to cool down and then go address with my kid what they did. But you have to discipline. We read a book, Raising Kingdom Kids, and Tony Evans, he wrote, discipline must flow out of a heart of compassion for your child's well-being in future. And so that's why when we respond to anger sometimes, they're not getting that compassion part.
It's not as productive as it would be if
you
are calm and collected.
Yeah, and so that's why sometimes you might just have to say, go to your room and give me a minute.
Yeah.
Because if you're about to respond right now, you're going to give them a whooping of their lifetime, where it's like, I need to think about this before I respond.
I think sometimes too, like, people don't understand that, like, discipline is a form of love. I mean, Scripture also says in Proverbs, like, the father disciplines the child he loves. You know, it's like, you know, do you love your children? Yes. Do you discipline them? Well, then the answer should be yes. I mean, it's a way that we love them, but it is hard because there's a lot of emotions involved. And I know I read a book a while back. It's just called Parenting, and I can't remember who it was by, but really good book, kind of same type of thing, talking about using kingdom principles in how you parent. And when it talked about discipline, it did say, obviously, like, we need to discipline our kids, but like we do need to pump the brakes on remembering that, like, when it comes time to discipline, a lot of times there's a lot of emotions. Okay, our kids have a lot of emotions, and depending on what age we're dealing with, whether they're pre-adolescent or they're preteen or maybe teenager, like, there's a lot of emotions and maybe even testosterone or, you know, estrogen, whatever, you know, it's like there's a lot of things going on. Okay, there's, you know. And if we think of how, like, we want to be parented, you know, by God, how we even when we make mistakes and mess up, like, we expect God to discipline us, but like with love and grace and kindness and understanding. Are we doing that same thing with how we're disciplining our kids? Are we going into it and saying, okay, I'm aware that, you know, I'll take, you know, one of my kids, you know, let's say I take one of my kids who's, you know, we've got, you know, our little Elijah who's 3, you know, as we start to discipline him for things, it's like we still have to take into account, like, he's 3. Yeah. He's just kind of getting to that age where he's starting to have feelings and emotions and reactions and overreactions, and we have to kind of take that into account because sometimes as parents we have this urge to discipline our kids because, maybe we are angry, upset, or here's something that I kind of learned is, like, maybe we're disciplining them because we're like, we feel embarrassed. Right. We're out in public and they act out, and now we're embarrassed because our little, you know, 3-year-old or whatever is acting out. It's like, well, they're 3. Right. Yeah. You know, sometimes we as parents and adults don't know how to handle our own emotions. Exactly. Right. So how can we expect our young children to perfectly have their emotions? You know, sometimes, you know, your kid might be, you know, freaking out about something and you know, you're talking to them. It's like easy for us to just like, hey, snap out of it. Right. Change your attitude. Stop throwing that fit. Well, it's like, what happens when you're throwing a fit? Right. And somebody comes up to you and says, hey, Chad, change your attitude, change your fit. Like,
yeah, I say that all the time.
Story of my life. Yeah. Every day.
You know, but you know, it's like, it's hard for us adults to keep our emotions reined in sometimes. So I think, like, having that in mind and remembering that, like, hey, these kids are not my kids. They're God's. Right. They belong to Him. And He has given them to us to be stewards of raising them and loving them and being their parent, but, like, they're His kids. And I know when I parent, and even when we discipline, and we do it from that perspective of, like, these are God's children. Yeah. And I want to make sure that I'm doing this right. You know, it just kind of puts things into a new light. So, but it's tricky. It's hard. It's not easy.
Hard. Yeah, and as they, obviously, different ages, you discipline differently. Obviously, the older you get, like you said. And it's just, I know one thing I've just seen, which has bothered me nowadays, especially with, like, older, you know, teenagers, is, you know, like school, for example. You know, growing up for me, it was like, you know, you get in trouble at school, you get in trouble at home. Yep. And you just see nowadays, you see those kids that don't get disciplined very much at home because they get in trouble at school and maybe they call the parent or they call whatever. And instead of the parent dealing with it at home and disciplining their kid, they come storming into the school and then they blame the teacher of, like, no, this is your fault, or why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? Yeah. And those kids know, well, I'm not going to change my behavior now because my parents don't even care. I'm going to go home and tell my parents my side of the story. They're going to believe my side of the story. And I'm going to come in and they're just going to ream out the school. And so you can tell there's obviously no discipline at home, and therefore there's no behavior change. Right. And ultimately, discipline is to change the behavior. And discipline should hurt to a certain extent. Like, not necessarily physically, but it should hurt to a certain. Some of these parents, I did discipline. I gave them a stern talking to. I said, don't do that again. And so they're going to listen.
All the while, they just had circus music playing through their head.
Exactly. No, the biggest thing with discipline, and obviously there's different ways to discipline your kids. But the important thing is that you do have discipline. Like if you're a parent that just like, oh, my kids just get away with whatever and I don't really do it, like it's going to affect them, because if you don't correct the behavior early, it's just going to get worse as they get older. And it's a lot harder to correct behavior with a teenager than it is with like a 3 or 4-year-old, where you're instilling those things early. You want to address it as early as possible. So discipline's a big one for us. And then the last one, we don't need to spend a ton of time on this because we kind of already hit on it, but just kind of wrap things up, is instruction. And you've talked about this, right? Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Psalm 34:11, come, my children, and listen to me, and I will teach you to fear the Lord. And I think this can be summarized with pretty much what you've said is your number one job as a parent should be to raise your kid to follow Jesus. That is the top priority. And you do that not only by telling them, but by showing them, by how you live your life, by being that example, by putting them in positions to read their Bible. We try, and we're not perfect in this by any means, but we try, at bedtime to get them to go to bed early enough to say, hey, go read your Bible. Like, do your devotions before bed. We'll come up, we'll talk about it. We've been trying last month, we tried instilling, we've done it a couple times now, on Sunday nights for like 15 or 20 minutes. We'll put on worship music on YouTube, and all our kids are reading their Bibles, and us as well. And then after like 15 minutes, we turn the TV, turn it off, and then we'll say, hey, what'd you read? What'd God speak to you? But it's those moments of like, as a family, of coming together, but just showing that like, this is the center of what we do. And so, yes, do we do it every week? No. Are we perfect in that? No. But the point is like, our goal is to raise our children to follow Jesus. And so you do that by not only your words, but your actions as well. And so instructing them is crucial. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, but they're watching. I just feel like they're watching what you're doing. You living by example. It's like one example you guys are even doing with the season that you're in right now, and just different sacrifices that you don't even probably realize you're making, but your kids are a part of it, and you're teaching them that, hey, this is what we're called to do as a family, and they're going to look back on like this season one day and just, see God's provision, see God's peace on your house, and just what he's done with your family. So that's the kind of stuff. That's
definitely our prayer. I feel like it's seasons, right?
Yeah.
I mean, parenting is seasons, and I think the season you guys are in, it lends itself to you guys sitting around and reading your Bibles for that amount of time and worshiping together. Like, that's amazing. I'm like, I'd love to do that, but like,
we're in a little different season than us.
Right, exactly. So I think just taking what God has put in your hands and the season he's led you in, or that you're walking through, and we say stuff out loud. I'm that kind of parent. I try to like teach my kids like as we are going.
Yeah.
So like you guys brought up sports. Like we didn't enroll our kids in sports for the last year and a half because it would have been impossible. And they were bummed about that. That was hard for them. But we talked through it. We said, hey guys, like, we get that. That stinks, doesn't it? But look at what we're doing. This is what God has called us to, is to care for these little babies. And our obedience to him it's more important right now than us, doing what we want to do and, getting to go play sports and so we kind of try to just say out loud and explain and walk through it, because I don't think kids on their own just come to those conclusions, right? We have to lead as parents and kind of direct their minds and their hearts. And so, as far as instruction goes, I think that's,
I love that you said that, like the conversation behind it, because so many times I think maybe some parents don't always share everything with their kids. You don't want to overshare certain things, but letting them in on what you're experiencing or what God's doing in your life. I think they're kind of like, oh, like we've had some situations where just God's provided in crazy ways, and to be able to go to our kids and be like, oh my word, like, look what God did. And then they're like, wow, like, they'll remember that. They'll look back. Yeah, God provided. God, the part you shared. So
for sure.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, anything else you guys want to add before we shut it down? I mean, we could sit here for a long time. We could just tell stories of us. I'm sure people would love to hear that.
I mean, my kids are still convinced that some stuffed animals came alive on one of our vacations we went on together.
That's hilarious.
So.
That's funny.
Love it.
Awesome. Well, hopefully you all enjoyed this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. We release these episodes once a month, every third Thursday. So be sure to do that, and we will see you on the next one.